Laura Cereta was a humanist, writer, and philosopher from the Renaissance period who left many letters throughout her life, giving insight into her thoughts and experiences. Today, we'll take a look at how she dealt with some of the criticism she got from people around her through some of the letters she left behind. So Laura was born in September of 1469 in Brescia, which is in the northern region of Italy. She was born to an upper-class family, so she was able to receive a good education from an early age. Many women during this time, unless born into upper-class and noble families, would not have been able to receive a real proper education, let alone one that would have spanned many subjects. But Laura was educated at a convent school between the ages of 7 and 11, where she focused on religious principles, reading, writing, and Latin. She also dedicated herself to reading and studying classical texts from ancient Greece and Rome. Her love of writing started at a young age, and while at school, she wrote about how she spent many sleepless nights reading and doing embroidery. It appears that at such a young age, she may have suffered from insomnia for at least 2 years, and possibly in later years as well. I guess if anything good came out of having insomnia is that she was able to grow in knowledge by reading, and she was able to practice the craft of embroidery. After leaving the convent school and returning home, her father was involved in her continuing studies, which now also included mathematics, astrology, and agriculture. And while at home, she would help out around the house and was involved with her younger brother's education. And she would even help her father out with some of his business matters. In 1484, at the age of 15, Laura married Pietro Serina, a business merchant from Venice. And Pietro was also very much interested in academics, and so she would continue on with her studies after they married, just as much as she did before. And she really continued her dedication to read the classic texts from ancient Greece and Rome. So of course, since she loved to write, she wrote about her marriage, and so we're able to get an insight into her thoughts on the relationship through letters that she wrote to Pietro, her husband. Her marriage was said to be a happy time for her, and she loved her husband very much. She thought highly of him and believed that a marriage should have honor, respect, honesty, and love. And they did have their disagreements here and there that we know of thanks to her letters as well. They had issues of communication and neglect, but in one of her last letters to him, she writes that they are now and will always be two souls belonging to a single being. So unfortunately, her marriage did not last long. After just 8 months of marriage, she became a widow due to her husband falling victim to the plague. Laura and Pietro never had any children together, and she remained childless throughout the rest of her life, never remarrying. After his death, she took a break from writing letters, but when she resumes writing, we get a glimpse into her grief and how she was able to get through it. In one of the letters, she wrote this while at her country home. I came at the end when my husband was feverish. Dying myself, I saw him half dead. I cheered him when he seemed to revive. I wept over him when he died. I fell lifeless on his dead body, and the fatal house which awaited me for marriage admitted me to lamentation. Thus one saw me a girl, bride, widow, and pauper. She wrote all of this in a letter to one of her friends. And eventually she was able to get through the grief of losing her husband by focusing on her writing and studies and teaching philosophy once she got a little bit older. Many of her letters included themes of daily life, such as her relationship with her parents, marriage, family, womanhood, and education. But she also touched on other subjects like solitude, fate, war, and death, as well as roles that women played. She wrote about marital oppression, like in one letter to a male friend that is going to get married for the first time. She describes the things some women had to go through in their loveless marriages and the lengths they would have to go through to escape the abuse. She also wrote about women's denial of education and what women had to face when choosing to go a different path than the norm, which she had her fair share of experiences in this, and she had a lot to say on it. So with all the letters she left behind, there's a possibility that some of her letters were written to fictitious characters. They believe this mostly because there are no records of some of the people she addressed her letters to. And she also wouldn't address the letters to anyone specifically sometimes. One letter was addressed to someone named Bibulus, which means drunkard. It's as if they were written for a general audience at times versus to a specific person in her life. Or maybe she used the letter writing to get out her emotions when something happened and she couldn't really do anything specifically to that person or confront them personally. Around 1485, at the age of just 16, her letters began to take on an essay-like feel. Her letters would gain praise by those who read them, and her father would sometimes send them to others to read. And in 1488, she assembled 82 of her letters that she had written between 1485 and 1488 into a volume that would circulate in manuscript form between the years 1488 and 1492. She dedicated it to her patron, who was Ascanius Maria Sforza, in hopes of being recognized as a writer. The volume was even read by other humanists in Brescia, Venice, and Verona, and one of her goals was to become famous and achieve more fame than her contemporaries through her writing and teachings. So this is most likely the reason as to why she chose to put her collection of letters together. She was always really confident in herself, and she said she wanted to give the name Laura a second new immortality through her. In a letter to her cousin in 1486, she wrote, "With you as my judge, this work can win a place for me, a woman writer, among the most highly praised of our ancestors." And although she was often praised for her writing, there were some, if not many, who thought her letters were written so well that they accused her of plagiarizing, and some would say that it was probably her father that wrote for her. People would belittle her and her writing, and one time she was even demanded by one critic to provide on-the-spot proof of her writing abilities. So she often had to defend herself and her intellect, and not only to men, but women as well, which is ironic since she's seen as a feminist of the 15th century. She would respond with kindness at times and with a little aggression at others, but she would always make sure to point out that a woman could be just as learned as a man if she applied herself. She wrote, "It is the God-given right of women to make the choice to become learned, just as it is for men." She documented one of those moments where a man was shocked at her knowledge. The man told her not only were they surprised, but also pained that she showed this extraordinary intellect, and that one would have thought nature would give to the most learned of men. Her response to this begins with, "You seem to think that so learned a woman has scarcely before been seen in the world. You are wrong on both counts." She continued on to say, "I agree that you should be grieved. Indeed, you should be ashamed, for you have ceased to be a living man, but have become an animated stone. Having rejected the studies which make men wise, you rot in torpid leisure. Not nature, but your own soul has betrayed you, deserting virtue for the easy path of sin. I would remain silent, believe me, if you, with your long-standing hostile and envious attitude towards me, had learned to attack me alone. But I am angry and my disgust overflows. Why should the condition of our sex be shamed by your little attacks? Because of this, a mind thirsting for revenge is set afire. Because of this, a sleeping pen is wakened for insomniac writing. Because of this, red-hot anger lays bare a heart and mind long muzzled by silence." Throughout the rest of the letter, she went on to list accomplishments by women in literature and ancient Greek and Roman history, as well as other educated Italian women who were involved in writing during the 15th century. So to make the case that women have been and will continue to be exceptional and capable of being knowledgeable. Interestingly enough, in the same letter, she points out that some women have different goals. She says this, "For some women are concerned with parting their hair correctly, adorning themselves with lovely dresses, or decorating their fingers with pearls and other gems. Others delight in mouthing carefully composed phrases, indulging in dancing or managing spoiled puppies. Still, others wish to gaze at lavish banquet tables, to rest and sleep, or standing at mirrors to smear their lovely faces. For knowledge is not given as a gift, but is gained with diligence. The free mind, not shrinking effort, always soars zealously toward the good, and the desire to know grows ever more wide and deep. It is because no special holiness, therefore, that we are rewarded by God, the giver, with the gift of exceptional talent." So needless to say, she was a big supporter and quite vocal about women being able to choose what they wanted to be, and she was always ready to defend herself and any other woman when someone questioned their intelligence. So much so that at one point she writes about how her mind had grown tired defending her own sex, but she felt it an obligation. But like I mentioned earlier, it wasn't just the men that would give her a hard time. Women did it too. And just like with the men, she did not back down in trying to defend herself and other women like her. These next words are from a letter addressed to a woman whom she gave the name Vernacula, which could mean common slave. I cannot bear the babbling and chattering women, glowing with drunkenness and wine, whose impudent words harm not only our sex, but even more themselves. Empty-headed, they put their heads together and draw lots from a stock pot to elect each other, but any woman who excels, they seek out to destroy with the venom of their envy. When people think of this time period, they often think of women not having any rights or being able to have careers or anything other than have children, but that wasn't exactly the case. While yes, the lower class may have not had access to education and were very limited to what they could do, the working class and especially the upper class had a few more options. Many upper class and noble women were educated, and some even would take part in the family business or have some sort of business of their own. In a previous episode, you hear me talk about how young women in upper class circles often received the same education as their male siblings, but that's not to say they didn't face challenges or that even though they had access, that they would have chose these routes. This is probably why Laura was such a huge advocate for women focusing on their education and writing, as well as taking part in cultural conversations. Laura never thought of herself as anything special or out of the ordinary when it came to being a woman. She was aware that it was her decision to become a learned member of society, and that other women could make that decision as well. Laura spent the rest of her life teaching philosophy and giving public lectures on the subject, but in 1488, after putting her collection of letters together, her father passed away just a few months later. It's said that after his passing, she gave up writing altogether, and there's no material of hers that remains in the last 10 years of her life after 1488. She passed away in 1499 at the age of 29 or 30, but the cause of death is unknown. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this look into Laura Cereta's life and letters. I think it's really cool that we have these letters available, even if they were just written in a span of just a couple years. It helps us get a look into the thoughts and life of just one more person in the 15th century, especially a somewhat ordinary person versus someone in a position of power or ruling over people. I will be back in 2 weeks with another episode, and if you guys want to see daily content from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, make sure to follow me over on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under History by Lynny. Thanks again, and until next time.